Mr. Speaker, I ask to address the House for 1 minute for the purposes of inquiring about next week's schedule.
Without objection, may proceed.
I thank the Speaker, and I yield to the gentleman from Maryland, the Majority Leader, for the purposes of announcing next week's schedule. I yield.
I thank my friend for yielding. Mr. Speaker, on Monday, the House will meet at 10:30 a.m. for morning hour debate and 12 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until Tuesday. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for morning hour debate and 10 a.m. for legislative business. Members are advised votes could occur as early as 10 a.m. on Tuesday. On Wednesday and Thursday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for legislative business, and on Friday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. We will consider several bills under suspension of the rules. A complete list of suspension bills will be announced by the close of business tomorrow. In addition, we will consider H.R. I don't have the number yet, the Tax Extenders Bill of 2009 and H.R. 4173, the Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act of 2009. I thank the gentleman for yielding.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman. And, Mr. Speaker, since this is our first colloquy following Thanksgiving break, I'd like to ask the gentleman if he could give the members a sense of what legislation perhaps that we'll be voting on for the remainder of this month, and I yield.
Well, first of all, let me say to the gentleman that it's my hope that we will adjourn the first session of the Congress from the House perspective by the 18th. With respect to the bills that we're considering, obviously we have 7 appropriation bills that have not yet been enacted. The continuing resolution expires on the 18th of December. It is my hope that before that time we will have provision for the passage of all 7 of the appropriation bills, either individually, which may be difficult because the Senate has not passed 3 of those bills on its floor, that in one form or another we will have all 7 of those bills passed prior to the 18th. The Speaker and I and Leader Reid all want to avoid another continuing resolution, which we think is not the best way to move forward. We're hopeful that we can accomplish that. In addition, the regulatory reform bill you heard will be next week, tax extenders. We have the unemployment insurance. We have COBRA extension. Both of those expire on December 31st. We have the Patriot Act, which provisions of which expire on December 31st. We want to address that. We've got highway reauthorization, which also expires on December 31st. We want to address that. And we have, I'm sure, other bills that we will be considering. As you know, I know you're happy about it. I'm happy about it. Iran sanctions will be on the calendar as well, on the suspension calendar next week.
Well,
Excuse me, week after.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman, and I know I'm joined by the gentlelady from Florida in thanking you very much for your work on the Iran Refined Petroleum Sanctions Act and bringing that to the fore.
I thank the gentleman for, if the gentleman will yield.
Yeah, I yield.
I appreciate the bipartisan work. I see the ranking member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, my friend Ms. Ross-Leitman, who's worked very hard on this as well with Mr. Berman. I'm pleased that this is coming. I think it's very important that we send a very strong message as we see the Iranian government and the president say they're going to do one thing but apparently never do it. So I think it's appropriate that we act.
Well, I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, I'd note that he did announce that we will be considering H.R. 4173, the financial regulation bill, and perhaps 7 appropriations bills. I don't know which form that would be in, whether it be separately or in an omnibus form. But nonetheless, all of these are incredibly large measures costing billions of dollars of taxpayer money, stretching over thousands of pages. And my question, Mr. Speaker, is what is the gentleman's intention as to the period of time which members and the public will have to review these bills prior to the members voting on them? And does that mean that we will still be consistent with the gentleman's representations on other bills prior to this session, that we would have 72 hours for consideration and review of those bills, as well as any manager's amendment and self-executing amendments in a rule? And I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. He is correct. I've made that representation that I want to try and accomplish that objective. As the gentleman also knows, on both sides we've experienced this issue. At the end of a session, as I fervently hope we are closely achieving, at the end of a session, obviously, when you're having conference reports, it's not necessarily possible to do that if you can't get the conference reports moved quickly enough by the time you want to adjourn. However, having said that, the gentleman's correct. The reform bill, the regulatory reform bill that is going to be reported out by the committee, has been reported out, will be available this evening, and will be available. I don't expect to have that on the floor until no sooner than Tuesday of next week, so there will be plenty of time to review that piece of legislation. As you know, that has had extensive hearings. Two of the bills that are included within the framework of that bill we've already passed, as you know, so that for that bill there will be a lot of time. With respect to the omnibus that you referred to, we have discreetly, individually considered each one of those bills. They passed the House. The Senate and House have reached agreement, I think, or hopefully are on the verge of reaching agreement on those bills individually so that they can be included. The Senate, as I pointed out, has not considered three of the bills on the floor, and I'm not sure, given their focus on health care, that they will be able to do so. So in that standpoint, they would be included in a conference report as opposed to considered on the Senate floor. They've been considered on the House floor, and we will give as much notice as we possibly can on those. But the good news is we've considered those individually on the floor, so the overwhelming majority of those bills are well known to members.
I thank the gentleman, and I do realize that the House has considered its version, although we all know that when they come back from conference, especially many of the members on both sides of the aisle have some concerns about earmarks and others, which would, I think, warrant the time to review these bills. In the same light, Mr. Speaker, it is the concern of many that we have an opportunity to look at any manager's amendment or self-executing amendments in the rules that are presented to the body, and are having time to review that as well. And I would just make that note. Mr. Speaker, I would ask the gentleman, does he expect a final health care bill this month? And I yield.
I will choose my words carefully as opposed to expect. I hope that there will be a bill. Clearly, the Senate is debating that bill. We believe that this is one of the most important bills that any member will have considered during the course of their tenure in this House, including myself, and I've been here, as you know, some time. The Senate is debating those bills now. Senator Reid has had great difficulty getting this bill to move along in an orderly fashion, which I think makes it impossible to predict when the Senate will be able to pass it. I can tell you that I know that the Leader Reid is hopeful that this bill will be considered over the next 10, 12 days, and that they will be able to pass it prior to the 18th of December, and I'm hopeful that they can as well.
I thank the gentleman on that. And as a follow-up to that, Mr. Speaker, I know there's been some discussion and reports that the Senate may be scheduled to be in session past the Christmas holiday, and was wondering, Mr. Speaker, if the gentleman expected that to impact the House's schedule after Christmas. And I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. It's my expectation that it will not, but I want to give this caveat. If, in fact, the Senate passes its health care reform bill early enough so that we may have a conference and conclude a conference, so that at some time in December we could pass a conference report with that caveat. Now, whether that will happen or not is obviously not able to predict that, but other than that circumstance, it's my expectation that we will not be in the week of the 21st or the week of the 28th.
I thank the gentleman for that.
Nor for that matter, as the schedule, as you know, reflects the week after the 1st, which is the 3rd, I guess.
I thank the gentleman, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd ask the gentleman, does he expect to vote on increasing the nation's debt limit this month? I yield.
Not only do I expect it, my belief is that it's mandatory that we do so. Obviously, the United States had never defaulted on its debt, and to do so would cause international disruption in the financial markets, further exacerbating an already difficult economic situation for our country and for countries around the world. So it is not only my expectation, but I believe it is absolutely essential that we do that. As the gentleman knows, we have passed already in this House an extension of the debt. The Senate has not passed that at this point in time, but I do expect it to be included in one of the pieces of legislation that we consider. I think it is absolutely essential, and in my view, whether you like the debt or don't, and none of us like it, it would be irresponsible for the Congress not to pass a debt extension for debts that it has incurred. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to ask a follow-up to that comment. Does the gentleman expect us to have an up or down vote on the increase of the debt limit, or if not, if it is a part, as he suggested, of another piece of legislation, which legislation that would be? And I yield.
Well, that has not been finally decided at this point in time. We'll have to wait to see what the Senate feels it can do in one of the conferences that we have. As the gentleman probably knows, under Senate procedure, while they're considering the health bill, the only thing they can rise for without the necessity to have a 60 vote to go back into consideration of the health bill is a conference report. So my expectation, it will be in a conference report.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to turn to the question of whether this House will be dealing with what has been reported a second stimulus bill. And I know that we have been reading much about the White House Jobs Summit today. There's been a lot of reports in the press about the majority's meeting on a second stimulus bill. And I'd like to ask the gentleman, Mr. Speaker, if he could clarify the timing, the content, and the cost of a proposed second stimulus bill, and I yield.
Well, the gentleman, of course, wants to use the language that we're not using. We're focused on jobs. Stimulus is a broader reach, frankly, than we are looking at. We do believe, though, as the gentleman has expressed on a number of occasions, that jobs is the focus. We are looking at legislation which will help to create jobs, expand our economy, ensure our growth. As the gentleman knows, the CBO released their report on the Recovery Act, which we passed, and its impact on the economy and employment in the third quarter, which was the first quarter in 8 that we had grown the GDP, as the gentleman knows. That was not the case in 2008, of course. Estimates that because of the Recovery Act, 600,000 to 1.6 million jobs, more Americans had jobs as a result of the Recovery Act. The GDP, according to CBO, was 1.2% to 3.2%, higher than it would have been if we had not passed the Recovery Act. And the GDP the unemployment rate was 0.3 of a point, or 0.9 of a point, lower than it would have been. The unemployment rate lower than it would have been. Mark Zandi, the chief economist of Moody's Economy.com, recently said, "The stimulus is doing what it was supposed to do. It is contributing to ending the recession." In my view, without the stimulus, the GDP would still be in negative as opposed to positive. Unemployment would be above 11%, and there are a little over 1.1 million more jobs out there as of October than there would have been without the stimulus. Having said that, you and I both agree not enough has been done, notwithstanding the fact essentially there has been, with 2 months exception with a little glitch up, a straight line decline in the number of loss of jobs per month from the high of the last month of the last administration of 747,000 lost. As you know, is less than 190,000 lost. We don't have the report on Friday, but it's less than that, I think, which is progress, but it's not success. Success will be when we start gaining jobs. In that context, I tell my friend that we are, in fact, looking at ways and means to spur greater job creation, allow small businesses to expand, get additional credit, as well as continuing to assist those who have lost their jobs and are in need of assistance.
I think
but I cannot, if the gentleman will yield
Sure,
again, I cannot at this point in time give you the specifics. You correctly observed the administration, because of its concern about job creation, is having a summit or forum today to seek advice from experts on economy, experts in the business field, and we're certainly going to look to them as well and talking to them. I want to also say to my friend that I would be more than pleased to receive from you and members on your side of the aisle suggestions that you might have to accomplish a greater growth of jobs in our economy.
Well,
I yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I certainly appreciate that extension of an offer to allow us to once again proffer our ideas. As the gentleman may know, I did speak out yesterday with a list of what I call a no-cost jobs plan, and I am happy to forward that to the gentleman. I have made a similar type of request of the White House, and I think have gotten a response that they, too, may be willing to consider some of the Republican solutions to the current crisis that people are feeling across this country. Mr. Speaker, I would say that I am somewhat heartened to hear the gentleman talk about the ineffectiveness of the first stimulus bill. The gentleman did say that the term stimulus was a little broader than what they're looking at now. And in my opinion, I thought that the definition of a stimulus bill was to create jobs. So if the gentleman now is agreeing with me that the creation of jobs did not hit the mark the way that was promised on the first stimulus bill, that we do need to finally focus on job creation, that gives me a lot of confidence, Mr. Speaker, because at least we're now talking about the same thing. And if along those lines, again, I am thankful that the gentleman asked for our solutions, and we're going to proffer those. But I do want to suggest that we can, and there are some common sense things we can sit down and probably agree on as to a person that we could do right now that wouldn't cost the taxpayers anything, and we wouldn't have to be continuing to mortgage the future of our children. I think both of us can agree, Mr. Speaker, that both sides have done their share to dig the hole of incurring too much debt for this country. Enough is enough, and I do think that we have and will offer solutions that will begin to arrest that trend, at the same time focus on job creations.
Will my friend yield?
I will, and I would like to ask one more point, and then I will yield. If we are talking about finally shifting to the mode, Mr. Speaker, of job creation, I'd like to ask the gentleman, has there been any discussion on in his caucus about perhaps holding back in some of the measures that are being discussed, such as the financial regulatory reform bill coming to the floor next week? Because there is a study recently released by the University of Chicago, University of College London, George Mason University economists, which have said that this package of reform bills coming out of the Financial Services Committee will reduce consumer borrowing by at least 2.1% and reduce new jobs by 4.3%. And essentially the study comes to the conclusion that interest rates will rise by 141 basis points, which will yield in the loss of over 1 million jobs over the next 5 years. So if we are concerned about job creation, why are we moving forward with such a measure? And I yield.
Thank the gentleman for yielding. Let me start at the beginning of his statement that I might facetiously say was written by Lewis Carroll, who wrote Alice in Wonderland, of course, when he says that I characterized the stimulus package, which I did not. I characterized the Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which the CBO said gained us 600,000 to 1.4 million jobs. So the gentleman likes to do this. He's done it a number of times. That says, finally, we're talking about jobs. As a matter of fact, in February, we passed legislation with no help, frankly, from your side, which in fact CBO says has created up to 1.4 million new jobs in America. In addition, we believe we've saved a lot of jobs in America as well. We are not where we want to be. The gentleman also indicates that I would agree that both sides of the aisle have dug the hole deeper on deficit. I say with all respect to my friend, we had an administration that was in office for 8 years, the Clinton administration. I'd remind my friend, I'm sure he is familiar with these statistics, that he inherited a $292 billion deficit from George Bush the first. He reduced that deficit that year. The next year he reduced it further. The third year he reduced it even further. The fourth year he reduced it even further. And the fifth, sixth, seventh, and eighth years, the Clinton administration economic program took us into surplus. The only administration in your lifetime, now I'm much older than you are, the only administration in my lifetime that had 4 years of surplus, and the only administration in my lifetime that ended their 8 years with a net surplus. So I would disagree with my friend that we contributed. In fact, your administration under Mr. Bush inherited a $5.6 trillion surplus. Who said so? President Bush said so in 2001. We dissipated that into a $10 trillion deficit, arguably the largest turnaround of any nation in the world, certainly in terms of dollars. I'm not sure on percentage. Some countries have had, third world countries have pretty bad experiences. But to turn around a $5.6 trillion surplus by $15 trillion and turn it into a $10 trillion deficit, and the worst economy we've seen in 3/4 of a century under the economic program that was pursued by your side of the aisle, very frankly, I'm not going to take responsibility for that, I tell my friend with all due respect. This administration was confronted with the worst economic situation of any administration since Franklin Roosevelt. And we have been trying with, I think, real focus and in some respects real courage, because some of the things we did were very tough. You, I think, joined us when we responded to your administration, the Bush administration, and said through Secretary Paulson and Mr. Bernanke, the country is in crisis. And if we do not act and act decisively, we may go into a depression. You recall that my side of the aisle responded to the Republican president, chief executive of our country, who said we were in crisis, and we responded, and 142 of us voted on a bill that nobody wanted to vote for in order to preclude us going into crisis. Your party, unfortunately, did not support your president, as you recall, in a majority sense on that particular vote in September of 2008. Luckily, we came back. We had a failure. Luckily, we came back. Notwithstanding the unpopularity of that bill, we did contribute to stabilizing this economy. It was a tough vote. Americans are angry about it. We're angry about it, bailing out people who were extraordinarily fiscally irresponsible. Those same people that we want to regulate next week to make sure they are not subject to the regulatory neglect that they were subjected to for 8 years when the administration's policy was to simply get out of the way, not to regulate, not to oversee, and we saw extraordinary financial meltdown. So I will tell my friend with all due respect, I do not accept his premise that we haven't been talking about jobs, and I do not accept his premise. I have not read the reports to which he referred. I do not accept his premise that, in fact, making sure that these big financial institutions operate in a way that minimizes risk, not just to them. They can afford the risk. They sock away money somewhere. The people who couldn't afford the risk, who saw their 401ks go into the tank, saw their retirement put at risk. So I tell my friend that next week we are going to adopt legislation, hopefully, that will try to ensure that America does not go down that road again. Just as Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s responded with regulation to ensure that the stock market excesses and betting on which people lost did not reoccur, and very frankly has kept us pretty stable. But unfortunately, a lot of the regulatory neglect, which I want to make clear, was not only in the Bush administration. There was some in the previous administration. We ought to have learned our lesson. I would hope you would join with us in adopting this regulatory reform package, which will protect consumers and ensure responsible behavior on behalf of those whom we entrust with large parts of our national wealth and the health of our economy. And I'll yield back.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman, and I would say he would agree with me that since the beginning of the 111th, priority one for this nation has been job creation.
That's correct.
And the facts are the facts. The stimulus bill was brought to this floor with the promise that it would stop unemployment from exceeding 8%. We are now at over 10% national unemployment. The facts are the facts. Under this administration, the deficit has tripled since the last administration left. That's the facts. Gentleman points out CBO says that we've created X number of jobs. I would say to the gentleman, while you have people across this country, 10.2% of the workforce being out of work, there is no way that anyone in this country would believe CBO when it says the economy is better. That's the facts. And so if we're going to be about job creation, my simple point is this about bringing the package of financial regulatory reform bills to the floor. I don't doubt the gentleman's intention to try and do the right thing. But the reality is, this is a case where we're doing the wrong thing for the right reason. This bill impacts negatively the job creators. We know this bill will increase interest rates 141 basis points, which means the loss of additional million-plus jobs over the next 5 years. So in that vein, I would ask the gentleman again, if we are to see our way to work together, let's relieve the harm. This bill adds to the harm. In the same way, I'd ask the gentleman, there is continued talk of the bill otherwise known as card check. If I've heard it once, I think all members have, from small businesses and large, the job creators, please don't pass that bill, because that will create a huge drain on job creation. So I'd ask the gentleman, is there any sense in his caucus that maybe now, in times of high unemployment, is not the time to bring up card check? And I yield.